everyone, and welcome to week 12 in Contemporary Public Health Issues. This week, we're really going to be looking at environmental health and sustainability. So, as you're well aware now, in your third year of a health degree, health is a very fluid concept and involves many elements. And one important element that we need to consider from a public health standpoint is that of the physical and biophysical environment. So harking back to this conceptual determinants framework, which I'm sure you're all very familiar with over your previous years of learning, and the fact that we sit in the middle and we've got all these layers sitting around us. In particular, we really see that global ecosystem, those natural environments and those built environments really scaffolding how our health develops, and our health is contributed by these ongoing external layers. A very important element of that, and increasingly so in this modern era, is that of sustainability. Okay, so from an environmental perspective, we really want to look at the avoidance of depleting all our natural resources. We really want to live sustainably with our means, within our environments, and really provide future generations with something to still use, enjoy, and live healthily with in the environment around them. I think this is a very telling image here, and the fact that primarily the Earth is covered by seawater and ocean, and we really have a very small slice of the globe that is biologically productive land. And if we're slicing down this about 18% of productive land through deforestation and all sorts of other means, then we really are reducing that sustainability within that environment. So we really need to look at the future. We need to think about processes that scaffold and leave something for future generations from an environmental perspective. We need to look at not over-exploiting natural resources, not overfishing our oceans, not mass deforestation of the Amazon. We need to look at how we can sustain what we have, that small 18% of the globe, for future generations. So only today, WHO actually stated in their 5-year strategic plan that the Sustainable Development Goals are really what they're wanting to be able to provide better health for all globally by 2030. So we're going to have a look at the Sustainable Development Goals today and just what that means and how we can achieve that from a public health standpoint. So basically, for sustainable development, we really need to have 3 core elements. We need to still encourage economic growth and prosperity. We need to have social inclusion on all levels of society. That includes low socioeconomic and to those that are privileged and well-resourced. And also, we need to have environmental protection. We have to stop wasting away our precious environmental resources. And we need to have these interconnected in a way that then provide that sustainability and that well-being for individuals and society. So how do we do that? Like I said, WHO have developed what's deemed Sustainable Development Goals, and they were developed, they were the knock-on from the Millennium Development Goal that preceded these, and they were developed in 2016. And they really look at pushing particular goals that improve the health while protecting of the globe, while protecting the planet. Okay? They recognise that we really need to end poverty, and that must go hand in hand with strategies to build economic growth. Education, absolutely key. Without education comes no economic growth for these populations, health and social protection. And these are the Sustainable Development Goals, okay? So you've got 1 right through to 17 there, and you can see that number 3 is health. How does sustainability link to health? Why is this important? Why should we be thinking about this in our practice as public health practitioners in the future? Well, we know that sustainability must be conceived in health perspective, and health must be conceived in a sustainability perspective. Simply put, without sustainable resources, food, water, we will not exist, okay? We need to be able to nurture and prosper clean air, clean water, all of these key elements, then we simply will not have the health that we have come accustomed to. So health within this SDG era, or Sustainable Development Goal era, as you can see, we can sit it nicely in the middle of all those goals around us, and it really goes hand in hand. How do we ensure healthy lives exist in a sustainable environment? We need to consider climate change. We need to consider the built environment. We need to consider our oceans. We need to consider poverty. We need to consider job options. We need to consider preventing disease. They are all interlinked, and if we address all of these sustainable goals, then we will unquestionably improve the health for many, many people across the globe. So the goal is to ensure healthy lives and promote well-being for all at all ages. So that's from the most vulnerable right through to the elderly. Particularly looking at food security, okay? So we really need to think about food security and the Green Revolution, okay? So we know that food security will become a major issue with climate change. Crops, in particular mass-produced crops, if the climate continues to rise, will become unsustainable. Rice being predominantly one of these. So we know that rice is an absolute core food and nutrient to a huge proportion of the globe. However, rice requires a huge amount of water to grow. Okay, so if you're going to have reduced rates of water and rain, then you're going to have reduced crops, and you're going to really see food security becoming a massive issue. Okay, so we really need to look at possibly moving away from mass production through often very heavy agricultural farming practices that use huge amounts of irrigation, really drain our water systems, pesticides, to really shift to more sustainable, self-sufficient food production, self-subsistence farming practices that not only provide security for those family and those immediately around them, but can also provide it for bigger populations as well. So that's globally. What do we think about local? Okay, so it's absolutely applicable to Western Sydney as well, and the SDG goals are something that we must maintain in our forefront within our interventions and practices within Western Sydney as well. Okay, as part of that, we are and have a regional centre for expertise, RCE. Now we're going to be focusing on a little bit more of this in your public health practice unit next session as well, but we're just going to touch briefly on it today. And now the RCE is a Sustainable Development endorsed United Nations University branch, and it really provides the link and strategies for people and challenges of social, cultural and economic different economic environments to provide sustainability within their local environment. So for us here in Western Sydney, looking around how we can provide more sustainable practices for food security, for environmental factors locally, but also looking globally at what's being done. It provides a network to link all these together. Okay, so locally for Greater Western Sydney, we need to look at how we can reduce our carbon footprint. Okay, and for you, you can think about what transport methods you use, how regularly you drive, walk or ride to work. Also looking at housing, okay, and looking at sustainable urban developments. Are we building in elements within these new environments? Are there local supermarkets? Or do you have to drive 30 minutes to get to your local supermarket? Okay, ensuring agricultural sustainability and food security. In Western Sydney, we're seeing a classic example of food security being compromised slightly and loss of agricultural lands by the push out of urban development. What would have the sort of food bowl growth of Western Sydney, for Sydney, was Western Sydney. There was large Asian green crops growing out here, also a lot of market gardening happening, and dairy as well. This is being lost by the urban sprawl of Western Sydney, so looking at how we can counterbalance that. And then absolutely looking at the biodiversity and the river health of those environments in Greater Western Sydney. So you can see here, as outlined by the RCE here at Greater Western Sydney, these are the main themes. We want to look at climate change and renewable energy. We want to look at education for sustainability. So via schools, as public health practitioners, you have the power of education, you have the power of knowledge, you have the power of the ability to partake that knowledge and education to the community as well, looking at working and engaging youth. We also want to look at food security and biodiversity. From an ecological sustainability point of view, we really need to look at how we can meet the needs of us now in terms of food, but also look at how we can protect those often very brittle ecosystems and the different animals and habitats within those ecosystems for future generations, okay? And we also look at why they need to be important and what resources we have to put in place for this, okay? How do ecosystems link to health? Okay, we know that unquestionably we live in a big, broad ecosystem, okay? We are part of that ecosystem. We eat and produce from farmed practices. We rely on water, we rely on a whole lot of different forms of insects and animals to work within that ecosystem to provide elements that then provide food for us, okay? So we are part of a living ecosystem and we need to protect those ecosystems as well as enriching those healthy communities around us. We know that ecosystems provide us with food, water, clean air, energy, medicine, okay? And we depend upon that diverse nature of those systems to function. We need pest control from other forms of vectors within the ecological systems. We also need them for pollination and bees, and I'm going to focus on that in a minute. The deconstruction of these ecosystems and the imbalance in these ecosystems is when things and us start to be at risk. Okay, so we really need to have healthy ecosystems to our own survival. We need to look at our food sources, we need to look at our weather, we need to look at the interplay of animals for pollination, insects for pollination, and then our soil nutrients as well. If our farming practices are taking out all those natural occurring minerals within the soil, then our food is going to be less nutrient rich. A classic example of this is bees. Okay, so simply put, without bees, there is no food. Okay, they provide that key pollination. They are that key that link flowers or fertilize the flowers that then provide the fruit of so much of our healthy fruit and vegetables to eat. However, they're on the decline. They're on the decline for many reasons, particularly due to urbanisation, but also high rates of pesticide use and whatnot. So we can see across the US and Europe, there's been a dramatic decline of bees. You can see here these rates of bee loss over the last 10, 15 years. We're talking almost 50% of bee loss. That's a big concern. That's a big concern because there's 50% less bees to get around and pollinate all the flowers. And then that means that there is potentially whole crops of fruit and vegetables that are unfertilized. Okay, so without the bees doing their key role in this ecosystem, our food security is at risk. Okay, who would pollinate the crops? I don't think people realize just how quickly and how efficiently bees zip from one flower to another. To do that manually is almost near impossible. Okay, so it's a nice little table to show us how important in that ecosystem for food production we have those rich, healthy bee populations, because without them, there's going to be that less volume of food to feed the population as needed. And like I mentioned before, soil quality and nutrients, very important to consider from an ecological perspective and a sustainability perspective. We need to start working with the land, not just taking from the land. So if you're continually farming the same plot of land without providing nutrients back to the soil or providing a break from that soil to naturally regain some of those selenium and magnesium nutrients within the soil, and look at it from a sustainability perspective, then you're going to have nutrient poor foods. It's very much a public health issue and will increasingly be a public health issue. It's a complex interrelationship, and we really need to consider that interplay between our built environment and then those public health outcomes. It is unquestionably an inextricable link between the health of a population and their environment. Particularly here, you can see for a flourishing community and the quality of life, sustainability must be at the core, along with strong public health capacity to enable that sustainability to happen. Another example of this is if we're looking at use of formula within or an environmental factor that came into play from a public health point of view was the melamine contamination of formula in China. Okay, so in 2008, unfortunately, children did die because there was contamination of formula. So formula created from milk or from dairy that was processed through a factory processing plant in China that was then contaminated with the chemical of melamine. Okay, so how do we get around this from an environmental perspective? We need to, as public health practitioners, look at the monitoring and policy. How did this happen in the first place? But then we also need to think about, well, from a sustainability point of view, having formula as a main way of feeding infants that is looking at large-scale dairy farming practices, then actually formulating the formulas within a factory which would use huge amounts of carbon energy. Why don't we just increase breastfeeding rates within China and look at empowering demographics that may not have had this in messaging before in China to move away from formula and into breastfeeding. So that's just looking at, from public health practitioners, how can we build in this sustainability concept. I also think small steps start with us, okay? You have the benefit of the knowledge, so why don't you be the role model? You can start doing things by saving electricity and unplugging appliances, okay? We know that standstill energy is the greatest use or greatest cost from a carbon point of view with us in Australia. Have a meat-free Monday. Try and eat less red meat. Again, we know that that's a great eating the carbon monoxide production from meat. We know is unquestionably something that we need to address within our carbon footprint in Australia. And also, simple things. Get yourself a reusable coffee mug. Reuse the same water bottle. Don't buy bottled water continuously. Cut down on waste if you can within your own home. So hopefully that's given you a little of a different look at public health and maybe something that you can take home and start to use in your own environment. Thank you, and I'll talk to you next week.